and we'll see what the college admission rate is for black people. If it plummets, we know why it plummeted. And if it drops, we also know that. But if it stays the same, then I will come back on here and say, hey, look, we clearly solved the racist structure that we had for college admission, for the college admission process. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. All right. Supreme Court guts affirmative action effectively ending race conscious admissions. So let me get like kind of ahead. Let me like start really quickly with my take on this. I don't think this is a positive change. I don't think we're going to see. Okay, so if I'm here, is it aiming at me? It's really hard to always tell when these. Okay, like if this wasn't okay, cool. So that's okay, cool. I'm of the general opinion that this will be a decision that will affect negatively the diverse admission process, or the like what we see right now in college admissions is an effort to diversify who gets to go to college, right? And I don't think with the affirmative action repeal, I don't think we are going to see a continuation of that process. I think what we will end up seeing in the long run is the percentage of either like, well, quite frankly, non-white people and non-white people. Sorry, there's like a bug. Non-white people entering into college. And we're also going to see, I think, a reduction in what I think is kind of that middle of the road, maybe not even the middle of the road, but like those people that aren't like star classmates, that aren't the best of the best of the best of their community, won't now be making it into college. So if you're like, if you go to a school in like the hood and there's 6 people, who want to go to college, 6 people who make it into the college application process, I think that we're going to see a reduced number of people actually get accepted, as opposed to maybe all 6 or maybe 5 out of 6. I think we might be looking at a situation where, maybe colleges take the top 1, maybe top 2. But this is going to allow colleges at the end of the day to, I think, be a little bit more picky with their choices, because when people can point, because there's not going to be a way for them to point, for people to point out, hey, you're not taking this many black people. Colleges now have the ability to go, well, we can't tell who is and who isn't. So it just so happens that we don't. And that's how it was before affirmative action. That's how it was for a very long time. That, you'd apply to college and sure, your grades are good, but maybe you have a black name. Maybe, maybe you were like 3rd best in your entire class, but the only black person in the entire group. But college admissions only takes the top 2. So now where do you go? You go to a different school. So it's just, maybe not even the same kind level of schooling. At the end of the day, access to further education, I think, should already, if you're asking me what it should be a like something that we fund socially. But all of that aside, let's get into the actual Supreme Court decision. And a few of the reactions. Specifically, we'll take a look at Thomas and Brown Jackson's opinions. So, the U.S. Supreme Court has found that Harvard and the University of North Carolina's admission policy violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It could end the ability of colleges and universities, public and private. So keep in mind, University of North Carolina, a public school, Harvard, a public school, a private school that does receive public funding. To do what most say they will need to do. Consider race as one of the many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants is to be admitted. So keep in mind also, affirmative action as a tool, in terms of what's the word? In terms of kind of a a way of determining who to hire, stuff like that. What affirmative action did was combat the very like shrouded and I think like easily easily obscured racism that we have in not only our that we had in our college admission processes and in our hiring processes. To put it plainly, studies have been done that when two people submit a resume with the exact same criteria, but one of them has a blacker sounding name and one of them has a more white sounding name, studies have found that the white applicant will end up getting a callback, whereas the black applicant will not. This is a result of kind of a normalization, or I guess a comfort around white identity in our society, mainly because a lot of our laws, a lot of our understanding of society, a lot of the ways that we conceptualize, I think, people are through not necessarily like, not that I think anybody's doing this consciously, but certainly through like when you think of the American citizen, do you think of a black guy? You kind of should. Black people are as American as everybody else. But like when you think of Captain America, what do you vision, right? And that's part of kind of societal, I think, mythology. And unfortunately, that has ramifications on actual people's actual lives, whether it be getting into college, whether it be getting a job. But affirmative action, what that did was kind of lift the veil on a lot of that and go, okay, you need to start hiring black people and people of color a lot more than you are right now. Because if left up to their own decisions, colleges and businesses are going to kind of do like well, I mean, I read the last name Jackson and then I read the last name, I don't know, Wilson. I don't know. I can't think of like Williamson we'll go with. How about that? And, I didn't really think about race at all. I just hired the Williamson one. I just kind of flipped a coin, and it just so happened that the person with the last name Jackson ended up being the black person. Now that person, that individual wasn't being racist, but again, we're not looking at this from like an individual standpoint. The consequences are individual. The system, the structure, the like mindset is like a structural one. It's a larger, more ubiquitous one. So affirmative action was a direct tool to go, hey, you need to make an effort to hire black people. We can't live in this country where black people just don't get hired because every time we flip a coin, it ends up being the white guy who gets the job. Like that's just not workable. We can't, like, it's not a system and it's not a structure that we can continue to tolerate. And now the Supreme Court and the people arguing this case have decided that the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment instead now is going to now basically say, no, you don't have to do that. Now you can go back to the, hey, look, I just flipped a coin on these two names and we'll kind of see what happens. My prediction is that less black people are going to get into colleges. Less black. Well, I don't know if this doesn't have implications on in terms of jobs and hiring, but certainly in colleges, we will look at this 1 to 2 to 3, maybe 4 years down the road, and we'll see what the college admission rate is for black people. If it plummets, we know why it plummeted, and if it drops, we also know that. But if it stays the same, then then I will come back on here and say, hey, look, we clearly solved the racist structure that we had for college admission, for the college admission process. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. And unfortunately, for us to learn that lesson, for us to make this change, walk back something like affirmative action, there are going to be, what, thousands? I don't know about millions, but certainly thousands who now, for us to find out if this is damaging, we are going to leave black people, or just in general, people of color, non-white folks, we are going to leave them behind in terms of college education, in terms of college admissions. So, for us to find out, a group has to get hurt by that, and I can almost guarantee you, it's It's going to be the black college admission rate. I can almost guarantee you. The decision reverses decades of precedent. Okay, right. Chief Justice John Roberts, a longtime critic of racial references of any kind. By the way, also, it's kind of silly, the idea that, like, we live in a colorblind world when, quite frankly, we don't. There is almost no structure that you can build created by people that isn't going to be colorblind in some form or fashion. A longtime critic of racial preferences of any kind wrote the court's majority decision saying that the nation's colleges and universities must use colorblind criteria in admissions. See, this is what I mean. Colorblind means, hey, you don't have to admit the black people to your college. We're not going to force you to have some percentage of black people in your college, which means they're going to flip a coin. And how many times do you think it's going to land on the white sounding name? That's what this is going to come down to, unfortunately. Quote, the court has permitted race-based college admissions only within the confines of narrow restrictions. Such admissions programs must comply with strict scrutiny, may never use race as a stereotype or negative, and must, at some point, end. The court wrote in its majority opinion. Now, I don't know why that is a thing, because the idea is like, no, look, guys, also keep in mind, what Roberts is arguing is we've solved racism. And I'm not sure if you've spent any time online, if you've been, maybe like, in the South a little bit, or, maybe in a little bit more conservative leaning areas. Have we solved racism? Are those people anti-racist, or are they just, hey, look, why can't we all get along? But the people they want to get along with are black people trying to live their lives and racists who think they should still be property. That's not really like the same thing as like, us solving racism. That's not really the same thing. The court wrote in its majority opinion, quote, respondents' admissions systems fails each of these criteria and must therefore be invalidated under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Oh, keep in mind also the idea, whoa, hey, stop it. I always forget that button does that. Keep in mind also the whole point of like, what is it where he said, whoa, there we go. Where I scrolled, whoa, man, I scrolled way too far. Wait, what? Huh? Am I crazy? Huh? Wait, did I click a different article? Huh? Oh shit, wait, did the article fucking change? Historic decision across country, individual diet. Wait, whoa. Son of a bitch. What? Don't you love when they do that? God damn, I was in the middle of a fucking sentence. Oh well. No, wait, no, maybe I wasn't. Propound to do it the most safest thing to do. Chief Justice John Roberts. Oh, okay, so now they added like majority opinion. Okay, nah. Okay, whatever. Let's see. Many universities have for too long concluded wrongly that the touchstone of individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. So also, okay. So I can't go back to the other quote, but I'm sure it'll come up later. So the funny thing about this is most universities, so they'll tell you like, oh, in the past, universities before affirmative action were picking for the challenges bested or the skills built or the lessons learned. But again, the question needs to be asked. If all of that is true, if that is truly the criteria that universities have always decided upon their admissions, then why is it that the college admission rate for blacks was lower? Like, at the end of the day, like, it's never been a colorblind system, and the idea that it is now is ridiculous. We've imposed a system to make sure that there isn't this kind of, blind discrimination, this like learned discrimination, this soft discrimination. But like, we haven't solved it. We haven't solved race relations in this country. And because of that, again, and we'll find out, when less black people get admitted to these colleges, we'll find out the results of this. And at the end of the day, when those communities suffer because once again, they are being held back due to structural racism. I know everyone hates that word, or systemic racism. They get all up in a twist about that one too. Then people will ask, oh, well, why aren't black people succeeding like their counterparts? Why aren't they doing as well as Asians? Even though Asians weren't property for 150 plus years, Asians weren't discriminated against in terms of redlining, keeping them in poor districts, keeping them in less well-funded districts, more specifically less invested districts. So like there's just so many things. We live in such a, you know, we live in this, like, these conservatives live in this world where like everything, everything has always been equal or has been equal long enough. And it's mainly because, I mean, if we're talking Alito, Gorsuch, if we're talking some of the conservatives, for them, it's not about equality. It's that they didn't agree with black people being equal to begin with. So they're fine with. And for Clarence Thomas, he's fine. Guess what? He went to college. He made it to the Supreme Court. He's a corrupt piece of shit. Can't wait till he moves on from the Supreme Court. So, Thomas doesn't care. Thomas, like Samuel L. Jackson in Django Unchained, he's already set. He don't need to give a shit about the rest of the black folk under him. He doesn't have to give a fuck. So he doesn't care about this college admissions bullshit because it's not a concern for him. Any of his kids, grandkids, any of them, doesn't matter. He's a Supreme Court justice. They're all going to get into school because they're related to Clarence Thomas. So, but that's what happens when you have connections. Somehow the court was not interested. They're interested in all this race stuff, but somehow they're not interested in something like legacy admissions. If they really have a problem with, if they really think that colleges, do their admissions through, bested challenges and skills built, then why the fuck are they even remotely interested in legacy admissions still existing? Like, what challenge? What, you get in because your dad came here? Is that challenge is bested? Is that skills built? No. But that's like the classism. That's the classism of it all. These people are, at the end of the day, deeply classist as much as they are, some of them, very racist. Let's see. Justice Clarence Thomas took the usual step of reading from the bench parts of his lengthy concurring opinion. Yeah, we know, dude. Thursday's decision, he wrote, sees the university's admissions policies for what they are: rudderless, race-based preferences. Yeah, These policies fly in the face of our colorblind Constitution. Oh, yeah. The Constitution that validated the 3/5 compromise. Right. Totally colorblind. Gotcha. As he has done before, Thomas, the second black justice appointed to the court, reiterated his long-held view that affirmative action imposes a stigma on minorities. While I am painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination. So keep in mind, he is rejecting the idea that there are objective, reality-based outcomes to systems that bear down on people of his race. This is where it's actually like, it's actively fucking disgusting, because Clarence Thomas understands, and he publicly recognized that he understands that the damage that affirmative action is, like the damage that the reversal of affirmative action will do will be severe in some cases. But to him, it's all about this, we don't want like black people to think like, in a certain way. We don't want them to feel a certain way. The fuck do I care about the idea that there's some kind of shared hive mind between black people? Individual black people are going to apply to college as they will. What I care about is the system that we build, and if that system disenfranchises them or doesn't it. But Clarence Thomas is more interested in this fictional hive mind bullshit about like, oh, the stigma of minorities. I don't give a fuck. Think I care about the stigma of minorities? You think I care that some racist white boy at Harvard makes fun of the black kid because he thinks he got into affirmative action? I don't give a fuck. That guy's racist. He's going to think whatever the thing he is that he's going to think about that black person at Harvard. What I care about is that black kid from whatever neighborhood he's coming from gets to go to Harvard and gets to get a good education and take that back to his community. But for fuck's sake. Hi, Spaggle. How are you? Sorry, you came in when I was like yelling. Whew. Anyway. Christ above. Shit is so fucking stupid. Anyway, while I am painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, I hold our enduring hope that this country will live up to the principles that all men are created equal or equal citizens and must be treated equally. Yeah. We get it. We know. You do the, oh my God. It's fucking disgusting, dude. Fucking goddamn. Roberts, for his part, pointed to the court's 2003 decision reaffirming the constitutionality of affirmative action programs, noting that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing for the court at the time, had suggested that there would have to be an end at some future point. That time has now come, Roberts said. Yeah, and that's a completely arbitrary line. Oh, why has the time come? Let's take a look. I'm curious. Let's see. From 2000 to 2018, college enrollment rates among 18 to 24-year-olds increased for those who are black from 31 to 37% and Hispanic 22 to 36%. The college enrollment rate in 2018 was also higher than in 2000, and those who were white, 42 versus 39. % of college applicants are black. Let's take a look. 36%. In 2020, 36% of black positions were enrolled in college compared to 40% of overall population. So, let's see, fall 2010, black students enrollment has declined from 3.04 million to 2.38, a 22% decrease. Undergraduate, show me this actually. Oh, buddy. Let's see. According to the Census Americans Community Service in 2021, 12% of the total U.S. population identified as black or African American residents aged 25 or over, 22.6%, had earned a bachelor's degree or higher. This rate is up from 17% in 2010 and falls short of the national rate of 32%. Geez, a 10%, 10% less compared to the rest of the population. So this is the thing. They'll tell you, oh, guys, we solved racism. It's done. Everyone's equal now. We're all good. But nowhere, I guarantee you, nowhere in their decision, the whole part where they said it has to end eventually, have they made any analysis or have they referenced any analysis for why it needs to end or why this is the moment for it to end? Absolutely. Is there a time? Will there be a time one day where affirmative action would not have been useful? Absolutely. I think we'd get there. Do I think that's now? No. And the reason why they want to do the whole it needs to end eventually is just because they want to be able to pick when they decide, oh, we have a conservative Supreme Court. Cool. That means it ends right now because we were never for it beginning to begin with. So the end of the day, nothing, they pointed to no metric to even show, oh no, black people, cool, we're good. Black people are going to college at such a consistent rate, the same as everybody else, that we don't need to worry about it anymore. It's good. And that's also the insulting part. The fact that they don't point to anything. They're just nope, it needs to end because it needs to end. Opposing view. It feels tragic, said Columbia University President Bollinger, who has for 30 years been a leading proponent of affirmative action programs. It feels like the country has been on a course of choosing between a continuation of the great era of civil rights and another view of, quote, we've done this long enough and we need a whole new approach. It's now the second choice. That sentiment, and also keep in mind, there is no second choice. There's nothing. The alternative to affirmative action is historically black colleges. HBICs are what fill that void, but not everybody can go to HBICs. And not only that, not everyone wants to go to HBICs. And even then, people should be going to diverse colleges to begin with. So, I mean, that sentiment echoed Justice Sotomayor's dissent. The court subverts the constitutional guarantee of equal protection by further entrenching racial inequality in education. The very foundation of our democratic government and pluralistic society, she wrote. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's first black female justice, also chimed in saying, with Let Them Eat Cape obliviousness, today the majority pulls the ripcord and announces color blindness for all by legal fiat. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. Yeah, pretty much. Indeed, the reality is that that in those places where affirmative action has been eliminated, there has been a severe drop in minority and particularly African American admissions. NYU law professor Melissa Murray was acting dean at the University of California, Berkeley in 2016 and 2017 when a state referendum barred the use of race in college admission decisions. There was an immediate drop-off in the number of African-American students that was both a confluence of the change in the admissions policy, but also African-American students not wanting to go to Berkeley under these conditions. Please don't want to be people don't want to be spotlighted. There is a kind of comfort in numbers, and it was very difficult for a very long time to recruit under those conditions. Indeed, the situation got so bad, she says, that she had to go to the president of the state university system to get permission to place clusters of African-American students in classes instead of sprinkling them around, leaving minority students alone to speak their mind when subjects of race were discussed. I joined the stream late. Do you think affirmative action is good? I've heard that admission rates of minorities increase, but the graduation rates of minorities remain the same. That would suggest that the program of affirmative action included more applicants, but not more qualified applicants. Okay, so Spaggle, that is correct. So I think here's the thing. Here's the big brain take on affirmative action. Affirmative action in a perfect world shouldn't be necessary, and in a vacuum, affirmative action isn't like great. But what affirmative action is addressing and what it is a tool for is a like kind of direct tool to combat colorblind racism, which is to say, you know, if you've ever read like any of those studies where like two people apply for a job, one with a black sounding name, one with a white sounding name, and the white person gets called even though they have the same exact admissions, because there's just kind of a social comfort with the white sounding name. That happens in college admissions as well a lot of the times. And what affirmative action does is kind of lift the shroud on who's applying to colleges, and then kind of doesn't allow that very latent racist sentiment that some people have in them. And I think everyone kind of has little biases. But when you're presented with those very like realistic, like obvious choices, you tend to go, okay, if these are both the same qualified, well, we have a lot of white kids here. And if they're going to be basically of equal quality, then, you know, maybe we should stock up on some more black people at our university. It would probably be good to have diverse educational population. Like that's kind of like the idea behind it. So in a vacuum, like affirmative action isn't great, but what it's there for, it came about in a time that also wasn't great. A time when, like black people just weren't quite as equal as everybody else in a way that like the same way like redlining would keep people out of like nicer neighborhoods. Now, yeah, absolutely. Unconscious racism. Thank you. I said that in the long form. I probably could have just said unconscious racism. Now to your second point, graduation rates probably did stay the same. But what that would tell you is that they're probably admitting people of like color from a bit more of a range of performance, because if you think about who attends colleges, right? A lot of times if you're a college and before a affirmative action, you probably want to bring in, white kids go to nicer schools in the suburbs, so you can admit a lot of those kids. But in terms of black kids coming from like the inner city schools, there's probably a few that are, most colleges would end up taking maybe the top 2, maybe top 3 black students from an inner city school. And that would be their whole like, all right, cool. There's our black people. And under that kind of system, like, yeah, do some black people make it to college? Yeah. And some of them do, but not nearly the range of performance that you get out of like a population of white college students. White college students can make it in if they're the top and if they're kind of in the middle-ish area. Whereas black students would often get picked only if they're at the top, meaning that you would end up leaving a lot of that like middle, like, you know, anywhere between B to like C plus range. They just don't get to go to college, or at the very least, they don't get to go to good colleges and some of these better colleges. So it's kind of the case where like they're probably taking a few people who are slightly less qualified, but also you're increasing the population in that, in like at your school in general, and all of those people, like 10 people instead of 3 getting to go to, we'll just use Harvard since this is the example they're using, getting to go to Harvard, they all get to take that education back to their neighborhoods, and then their neighborhoods can improve, and then their neighborhoods can reproduce more students like that and better than that. So like it's all about like reinvestment. It's very much a cycle. It's a reinvestment cycle, reinvesting in education and sending it back into the neighborhood so that it can reproduce constantly. And that's what white communities do. That's what a lot of Asian communities do. That's what a lot of Jewish communities do. This is a pretty normal thing and a pretty like reproducible thing that we've seen happen with a lot of communities. But Black communities specifically just haven't had that ability because what, Jim Crow was only like taken out of law, what, we're in 20s, 60 years ago? We've had 60 years where that's like the last hard barrier. And even then it's like, I say hard barrier, like, you know, but like that was the, like nobody else has faced that hard of restrictions on their existence as a community as Black people have in like 60 years. Like the worst it got for like Asian Americans are like people who first came over and had to build the fucking railroad, but like, and then like internment camps, and that's kind of it. Otherwise, Asian Americans have been left to kind of, you know, succeed as they have done. Hispanic communities are also kind of on the uprise in that, but Black communities, you know, Black people were property before. But you know, apologies for how long my answer was, but yeah, because the schools have historically low investment. Yeah. But that's the long answer. It's the long, and I can't even say long and short of it. But that would be like kind of the long answer. It's not that like affirmative action is like great, and I do think that you'll get to a point where you don't need it, but I don't think we're there yet. And the fact that like African American admission into colleges dropped after affirmative action was repealed kind of tells you that all we're going to see now is less Black people go to colleges, which means worse crime in the areas because people don't get to go to college. It's going to be worse outcomes. People are going to be poor because college education's tracks with better outcomes economically. Like, at the end of the day, college is a way that people get out of poor neighborhoods. And if people aren't given those opportunities, then they'll never get out. And then instead, that process will keep reproducing. So, indeed, the situation got so bad. All right, I read that already. Door is left slightly open. Sorry, let me switch back. Now every school will be in that situation, or so it may seem. The court did not entirely close the door on racial considerations in college admissions. As Roberts put it, nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering any applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, nor did the court address the tactic of clustering minority students in classes. What's more, the court specifically left open the possibility that nations' military academies, I don't know why I said academias, because of their distinct interests, may be able to continue with their successful affirmative action programs, which have resulted in a very diverse officer group. Okay, wait a minute. If you're telling me it's good enough for the military when they're like, I don't understand how you could possibly think that a more diverse military is like better than a more diverse college campus. I want both of those places to reflect as diverse of a nation as we have. It's fucking okay. The issue is so sensitive because it raises the question of national security that the court has backed away from from following its own logic, said University of Berkeley. Yeah, okay, this person's as smart as me almost. He notes that a similar logic might apply to police forces seeking to recruit minorities as to ensure that a virtually all-white force would not be policing a majority Black town. For the nation's colleges and universities, however, diversity will no longer be an acceptable rationale for taking race into account. Let's see. But in that case, okay. But in that case, admission doesn't help in any way. Graduation would help, but admission doesn't help. It spends money in order to make people feel better, but the material conditions remain the same. Well, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. Getting into college admissions is absolutely helpful. As far as I know, let's see what it, because I saw you mention what's it called, admission rates, but graduation rates of minorities remain the same. I don't think the thing you said about graduation rates is contradictory to minority rates increasing. It's not that the more like the rate is of what percentage, meaning if you're bringing in more black people and the admission rate and the graduation rate stays the same, that means they're coming in at the same rate and they're going out the same rate. Like, you haven't lost anything. But yeah, and also, like, especially for college, payment is also a big part of kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for? One of the, like, structural barriers that we have to keep certain individuals out of college, unfortunately. You know, if you're poor, it's kind of hard unless you get you know, a ton of scholarships to get into some of these, like, really, really, really expensive schools. And it can be hard on the family if they all pull together. Admission doesn't help. It spends money in order to make feel better. But yeah, no, it like affirmative action in getting admissions, like making sure that the admission process, that you can take in a diverse range of people, like, absolutely does help. The what did I say? The graduation rate not changing is not a bad thing. That means that the graduation rate is staying strong, even as you're bringing in a more diverse community. Because some people would say, like, oh, well, if we're bringing in, like, some underqualified people, the graduation rate would go down, right? But if it stays the same, then that means they were perfectly qualified. Or at the very least, they were qualified, like, enough that they didn't affect the graduation rate. If the problem of minority graduation rates are rooted in primary education, then we should invest more in education for the younger people, not just accept more people on the level. I mean, I want, like, education for everybody. Like, we should be funding and putting people through, like, my perfect world is we just fund education K through college. That's my perfect world, but we don't unfortunately have that. We do have to work with the system that we have right now, which we should be funding schools, but unfortunately the way that we fund schools, I'm not sure if you're aware, is based on property taxes. And that's why you see a lot of suburbs have a lot nicer schools than schools in the inner city, because they not only own property, but because that property is worth more, all of those taxes come together and go to fund a really nice school in the suburbs. Whereas if you're in the inner city, you probably, maybe you own your home, but the actual home price is really low. So your actual housing tax, so your actual property taxes are really low. And then your school is shit. Like, that's how we fund schools, is tied to a really, really pretty fucking racist, but more than anything, classist metric. Because we pretty much fund schools based on if the people around you, if, like, the neighboring area is poor or rich. That's kind of how we fund schools. Thursday decisions are likely to cause ripples throughout the country, and not just in higher education, but in selective primary and secondary schools like Boston Latin in Massachusetts, Thomas Jefferson High School in Virginia. Hey, Thomas Jefferson High School. Selective primary and secondary. Interesting. Why did they mention Thomas Jefferson? I went to that. Well, I didn't attend that school, but I did go for football games. And Bronx High School of Science in New York. Ultimately, effects will be felt in every aspect of the nation's economy, educational and social life, from the Rooney Rule that requires a minority applicant be considered in all NFL coach hiring decisions, to employment and promotion decisions, DEI programs in schools and workplaces, and much more. God damn it. Never feels like this is blowing enough. Okay. We're going to be fighting about this for the next 30 years, said Harvard Law professor Randall Kennedy. Edward Bloom, who for decades has been a one-man crusader against everything from the landmark 65 Voting Rights Act. Oh, I wonder what his politics are like. 2, affirmative action in higher education plans to challenge some corporate boards on racial preference grounds. And he says he knows of other plans to challenge minority scholarship and fellowship programs. Jesus Christ. This dude just wants black people. Edward, whoever this guy is, Edward Bloom, we're gonna note this now. Pretty open racist. Like, this guy fucking hates minorities. UC's Carabel notes that there are already employment lawsuits pending, and, quote, by the logic of this decision, I would think that racial discrimination, as defined by the court, will be banned in employment as well. Oh, great, cool. So you can go back to racially discriminating when employing people. That's nice. It's going to open Pandora's box across the country and across institutions and industries. Great. Yes, if we bring in 50% more minorities and the graduation rates stay the same, then it seems like there are a lot of people who are being left behind because of affordability. Well, yeah, there's a lot of people always being left behind in terms of affordability. Affordability is like, might be the biggest barrier. I would have to look into it, but affordability is going to be a huge barrier for a lot of people. But yeah, if you're bringing in a bunch of minorities and your graduation rate stays the same, that means they're on par with the last batch of graduates that you had. How the case came to be. The court's decision came in cases involving 2 elite institutions, one of the oldest public universities, University of North Carolina, and the other, the oldest private university, Harvard. Bloom, the anti-affirmative act, he's a racist, likely chose these highly visible schools as his legal targets precisely because of their elite status. UNC did not admit black graduates until Okay. UNC did not admit black undergraduates until 1955, and then only after it was offered to by the federal courts. It was ordered to by the federal court. Sorry, I don't know why I said offered. Harvard, by contrast, became the model for affirmative action programs in 1978, when the Supreme Court cited the school's consideration of race as similar to other traits the school relied on to ensure a diverse student body. Thus, the court said back then that race could be one of many factors that the school considered, just as other characteristics were considered. Geography, or being raised on a farm, or special achievements in everything from science to athletics, or being a so-called legacy student, the son and or daughter of someone who attended Harvard, which is bullshit, by the way. That system, reaffirmed twice by the Supreme Court, has remained in place, not just at Harvard, but at most of the institutions of higher learning across the United States, until Thursday, when the court, as it did last year in the abortion case, upended decades of its own precedents. Now, okay, so I didn't know this about Harvard, but that kind of bolsters my argument a little bit. If Harvard, one of the most elite schools, understood that in 1978, that having a diverse college population would like improve the performance of its students, then I think that actually bolsters my argument quite a bit, considering if they're taking into account like geography and like all of these like kind of intrinsic intangibles. Like, it seems like they were taking like a really like, all right, like what's the like what kind of people can we let into here? And as long as they're like, you know, as long as they're performing it on objective testing and stuff like that, on a level that we find suitable, it'd be good if we had like farm boys meeting with like suburban, fucking golf kids or whatever. Like, I think that's really good. That's like, again, that kind of bolsters my argument. Like, Harvard has been a very good school for a very long time, and clearly, this is a system that has worked for them. The court majority made clear that it agreed with students for fair admissions, which sued Harvard and UNC, claiming, among other things, that the schools discriminated against Asian American students who had SAT and grade scores higher than any other racial group, including whites, and who made up at Harvard, for instance, 29% of the entering class last year. SFFA asserted that the number should have been higher than that, though Asians are just 7.2% of the population. Wait, what? They make up 29%, but they're only 7.2% of the population? Interesting. Okay. Harvard, in defending its current iteration of affirmative action, noted that each class has only 1,600 slots, but by the numbers, It has thousands of equally qualified applicants. In the class of 2019, for instance, it had 35,000 applicants, 3,700 of them with perfect math SAT scores, 2,700 with perfect verbal SAT scores, and more than 8,000 with perfect grade point averages. There are no similar figures for the most recent incoming class at Harvard, but the number of applicants in 2023 has nearly doubled in the last 4 years. It's reduced directly in proportion to the increased admission after affirmative action, then the affirmative action program would be an effective way to work against historical racism. But if the graduation rates reduce directly in proportion, graduation rates reduce to increased admission after affirmative action, then the affirmative action program would be an effective way to work against historical racism. But if increasing admission led to lowered graduation, then affirmative action would be failed project. Do you agree? Yes. If my reading comprehension is correct, yes. If increasing admissions led to lower graduation, then affirmative action would be a failed project. Well, okay. So I suppose you're asking kind of two different questions, because the questions of whether affirmative action gets people through college compared to does it allow people the opportunity to get into colleges is very different. Affirmative action gets you in, essentially. It does not keep you there, but it does get you into college, not necessarily get you through college. Not everyone's a good student. I could probably, if I went to college, if I used some affirmative action program, I wouldn't make it through college. Not because my grades aren't good. My grades were fine, but I'm not a good student. I've never been good at school. I've been good at other things. I've been a lot better as a employee than I ever was a student. I just never took the schooling process. But yeah, if the graduation rate reduced directly proportional. Oh, you did. Okay, you did respond. Wait, no, you didn't. Okay, cool. Let's see what the public thinks. The reaction to Thursday's decision may be consternation in some quarters, but public opinion on affirmative action is not like abortion, a subject on which virtually every poll shows the public completely at odds with the court. Public opinion on affirmative action is more nuanced and more mixed. Polls on the subject conflict. Some show upwards of 60% approval of affirmative action, and others show less than 50%. Indeed, in liberal California, for instance, 57% of voters in 2020 cast their ballots against reinstating affirmative action in the state's public colleges and universities. Also, I also think this is actually a healthier way to address affirmative action. If the court is deciding hey, this needs to end eventually, then I do think a referendum vote is, I think, a healthier way to kind of gauge how much we need affirmative action. Because if a local population is yeah, I don't think we need this anymore, I think that's a little bit more tolerable than a court who doesn't deal in college admissions, a court made up of 9 individual people in a country of millions. I do think that leaving this up to localities to kind of decide upon, I think would be a little bit better. I'm not sure if I would I don't know if I would vote to repeal it, but I'd feel more comfortable with a decision one way or another. Let's see what the public. Okay, I'm not really care that much. Court's double take. Harvard's Professor Kennedy points to what he calls double talk in the Supreme Court's Thursday opinion. Take two signs, he says. A sign that says black people stay out, and contrast it with a sign that says black people welcome. Both have race in them. Are they truly both racially discriminatory? The Supreme Court, at least on one side of its mouth, seems to say yes, they're both racially discriminatory. But at the end of the Supreme Court's opinion, it says, well, of course, one can look favorably on someone who's overcome racial impediments. Impediments. I didn't know that was a word. Impediments? No, it's impediments. Okay. Impediments. I'm stupid. I think we are at a very critical point, said Columbia President Bollinger, who earlier in his career shaped the affirmative action program at the University of Michigan, a program that was upheld in 2003. He says the landscape of admission systems now shifting markedly with the demise of school rankings and less emphasis on standardized test scores. Columbia, he notes, has more veterans than any other Ivy League college. Quote, I think there will be a lot of experimentation in admissions, as there should be over the next decade. The magnitude of Thursday's decision was emphasized by the fact that in all, 6 justices wrote separately, and 3 justices spoke for more than 40 minutes from the bench. Wrote separately, right. Bench. The Chief Justice in the majority, Thomas concurring, and Sotomayor in dissent. Indeed, in print, the Supreme Court's decision plus dissents and concurrences reached a book-sized 237 pages. Jesus. Race has never been an easy subject in America to deal with, and it's about to get a lot harder. Yep. Oh yeah, let's take a look at Jackson and Thomas's opinions. All right. The only black members of the Supreme Court, Justice Clarence Thomas and Ketanji Brown Jackson, openly traded barbs in their opinions Thursday at the High Court, dealt what may be a death blow to the use of race in college admissions. That they would disagree on the subject is hardly surprising. Thomas, the court's longest-serving justice and perhaps its most conservative member, rose to public prominence more than 3 decades ago as a strict critic of affirmative action. Yeah, no shit. He's a fucking pick-me black guy. Tell me about it. Jackson, the court's newest justice, has long been a proponent of diversity efforts, and in one of the first cases she heard last fall, she made headlines for forcefully defending the idea that the Constitution allows and even encourages race-conscious policies to rectify the nation's legacy of racial discrimination. Oh yeah, that's also kind of ridiculous, because it's like, yeah, we've never been a race-blind country, and certainly when the Constitution was written, we weren't. However, the acrimony in the back and forth between the pair is unusual for the Supreme Court. Much of their exchange on race in American society seemed particularly prickly and personal. Thomas, who headed the Equal Empowerment Opportunity Commission before being nominated to a federal appeals court, and then the Supreme Court by President H.W. Bush, devoted 7 pages to his 58-page concurring opinion to critiquing Jackson's dissent. He rebutted Jackson's arguments in favor of race-conscious admissions and repudiated what he described as her grim outlook on racial equality in America. Quote, as she sees things, we are all inextricably trapped in a fundamentally racist society. Really? It's, well, certainly racial. The idea that we have races kind of means, like, understand, race is a social construct. What is white and what is black is wholly up to every person who looks at a, like, at another person. Like, there is no point, there is no objective point where there is a black person and a white person. That's not, there is no such thing as that. And the idea that Clarence Thomas would get up on here and say, oh, to think that we live in a world, we live in a nation where, like, race has ever been determinative, or has ever been it has ever been a fundamental part. Like, yeah, idiot, it was kind of a fundamental part when people who looked like you were fucking property, and then people created myths as to why you were better as property, why the white man was so gracious to take care of black people in this country. For fuck's sake, man, have some semblance of history. And that's what this is. That's what a lot of Clarence Thomas's race bullshit is. It's this, like, fictional, this fictional universe, this Earth, like, 825, whatever the fuck he's on, this multiverse where the Constitution and all people walk around in this frictionless, sphere where nobody has problems with each other, where there's no possible way that people take race into consideration for things, where people don't think about this, where laws are not written with the intent to be racist, even when they're not explicitly so. This is childish. This is so fucking childish to sit here and think, look, the Constitution, This was written by great men. At no point could there possibly be biases written into the Constitution by human beings who all live with biases. We are all governed in a way by our biases, by the things we enjoy, by the values we hold, and the values we oppose. And every time a document is written, every time a law is written, every single time, it is an exercise in our values. It is an exercise in our bias. Every single time. Every word you write, every opinion you share, every tweet you retweet, all of it drives towards and can be brought back to what you find valuable and what you support and what you oppose as well. So this idea that law is different from everything else that humans create is absurd. Like architecture, like music, like film, like critique, laws are written by man, and unfortunately they have the same pitfalls of man as well. As she sees things, we are inextricably trapped in a fundamentally racist society with the original sin of slavery and the historical subjugation of black Americans still determining our lives today. Wrote Thomas, 75, who in 1991 became the second black person after Thurgood Marshall. God damn, what a fucking drop-off. To be appointed to the High Court. The panacea, I don't know what the fuck that means, she counsels is to unquestionably accede to the view of elite experts and reallocate society's riches by racial means as necessary to, quote, level the playing field, all as judged by racial metrics. I strongly disagree. Well, unfortunately for Thomas, what he's missing here is that there's data to back up the fact that, that wealth distribution has been pretty awful to black people in this country. And the idea that you would want to fix that by, like, you know, creating a system where black people could get into college a little bit easier, and even a little bit easier really isn't like closing the gap. It's just like, it's one less excuse colleges can use to not admit black people. You know, and he wants to do away with that. And he wants to do away with it because he already graduated college, and, you know, he's perfectly fine with kicking down the ladder after he's made it to the top now. Jackson's 28-page dissent defended the use of race-conscious programs to ameliorate the pervasive present-day effects of America's history of state-sponsored racism. Gulf-sized race-based gaps exist with respect to the health, wealth, and well-being of American citizens. Her dissent began. Allowing colleges to consider applicants' race has universal benefits because it helps to close those gaps and thereby promotes equality, she wrote. Yeah, if you go to college, you are more likely to be wealthy, which means you are more likely to be healthy, and you're probably going to be, your well-being is going to be taken care of a little bit. It's almost like education is, it's a key factor to success in America. And insisting that colleges and universities avoid using race in the admissions process would not erase those profound disparities. With Let Them Eat Capabiliousness, today the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat, but deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. Thomas, who mentioned his junior colleague by name 18 times in opinion, I wonder why, assailed not only Jackson's views on the subject, but also her motivations. Justice Jackson uses her broad observations about statistical relationships between race and select measures of health, wealth, and well-being to label all blacks as victims. Well, it's not really about labeling individuals as victims. It's about identifying a systemic problem that we have. That if we are all equal, we should see, at the very least, more equivalent rates of success and failure. But we don't see that. We see vast gaps between health, between well-being, between success, and between failure when we look at different racial groups, specifically black and white people. So, he can bitch and moan about these statistics that she's referencing, but the only thing he's got to bring to the table is, oh, well, I just don't think it's healthy for black people's, mentality. To which, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that you were the hive mind of all black people, Clarence Thomas. Let's see. Justice Jackson, Brian, Thomas wrote, I cannot. Okay, here we go. Justice Jackson used her broad well-being and label all blacks as victims. Her desire to do so is unfathomable to me. I cannot deny the great accomplishment of black Americans, including those who succeeded despite long odds. Yeah. And if you would like to see more black people succeed, then should they all have to struggle through longer odds than everybody else just because of the color of their skin? Again, this is the case where Clarence Thomas at the end of the day is somebody that like made it and is now like, what? Why don't the rest of you black people just make it like me? Even though like it's like, yeah, you were the top like 1% who gets to make it. And we can either have it so only the top 1% of the black community gets to make it, or like white people, there's kind of a broad range of like, how far people get to go. There are a lot of white people who didn't graduate college, who didn't even go to college, who do perfectly fine. But there's a lot of black people who didn't do either of those things, who don't even do as well as the people who didn't go to college in white communities. Like, there's just such an obvious, there's such obvious inequality in our systems. But like for this guy, since he already made it, he's like, I don't give a shit anymore. Let me finish this paragraph and I will read that very long paragraph. Okay. Justice Jackson's race-infused worldview falls flat on each step. Individuals are the sum of their unique... Oh, fuck off, dude. We're not talking about... Oh, Jesus. I hate when they do this. Because it's like, we're not talking about individuals. College admissions is not about one admission paper. It's about a large swath, a like study full of thousands of admissions. What matters is not the barriers they face, but how they choose to confront them. And their race is not to blame for everything, good or bad. Well, okay. So, and keep in mind, this is flattening of like the dynamics in this country. The barriers, like what matters is not the barriers they face. Meaning that like, if you have a kid in the inner city growing up around like, quite frankly, gang members, growing up around with like poor educational standards, and they make it to like a 3.9 GPA, and then you've got some white kid, or we'll even make it some black kid who lives in the suburbs, wealthy, maybe like related to Clarence Thomas. They go to a nice private school with very well funded, nice area, lot of well-off families. They do really well. They get a 4.0 GPA. And the idea that like looking at those two people and saying, oh yeah, they worked like hard, they worked the equal amount of like effort to get here is fucking absurd. How like the environment that you have to like the environment that you're in absolutely informs the like how far you've come. Absolutely informs that. People who come from broken households and still become like the first person to go to college, the first graduate in their family, the first business owner, any of these things, like we understand this as being like unique and like really commendable when people make it through that. Whereas like, if you've always, if the dominoes have always lined up for you, if you had every advantage you could get, and then like, it's not quite as impressive. And quite frankly, it's like, I would rather the person who had to really work hard and really, but again, if we leave these colleges to make these decisions, will they take the kid who worked 3 times as hard as a suburban kid, but got 0.1% less on their GPA? Or will they take the 4.0 and go, well, you got a 4.0. That's all that matters. Like, this is erasing people's experiences. And because of that situation, the one that I just described, is what's going to happen. And it's going to keep some black kids out of college who should be going to these colleges. And the race is not to blame for everything, good or bad, that happens in their lives. A contrary, myopic worldview based on individual skin color, Thomas also accused Jackson of ignoring the oppression of other groups, including Asian Americans and white communities that have faced historical barriers. Okay, I would really love to hear. Asian Americans absolutely do have some of these pitfalls, but like, yeah, this is the straightest face you could give to. This is the face of white communities that have faced historical barriers. This is the face of I'm completely full of shit. Jesus, no other justice joined Thomas's concurring opinion. Christ. Okay, let's read. I've kind of had enough of this. I've had enough of this. I've had enough of reading this fucking piece of shit. Piece of shit's writings. Okay, let's see. All right, but rather something more fundamental like primary school. Okay. Let's say 20% of minorities were admitted to college and they graduated at a rate of 50%. And then using affirmative action. Sorry, my headphones are like kind of blocking some of this. Affirmative action, 60% of minorities were admitted. 60% of minorities were admitted, but the rate of graduation reduced to 10%. To me, that would say that the program admitted more people. However, it seems like admission was not the primary problem for these people. In that case, increased admission and reduced graduation, it seems like the problem isn't rooted during the admission phase, but rather something more fundamental like primary school. I mean, our primary schools, again, I said this earlier, our primary schools are funded by, what's it called? Are funded by property taxes. So they're not funded in a consistent manner. They're funded based on the neighborhood. So if you have a poor neighborhood, you get a poor school. If you have a rich neighborhood, you have a rich school. 20%. Let me just read these numbers. My dyslexia and dysgraphia is kicking in. 20% minorities are admitted to college. Okay. Do you mean, okay, so I'm assuming you mean like 20%. Okay, 20% of them graduated at a rate of 50%. And then using the affirmative action, 6% of minorities were admitted. The rate of graduation reduced to 10%. However, it seems like admission was not the primary problem for these people. I'm not anti-race consciousness, but I just want people to aim their efforts on the proper places. Yeah, I mean, look, the thing is, this goes back to like the, also I want to say that's not what we're seeing though. We're not seeing graduation rates reduce due to affirmative action. Affirmative action has not impacted graduation rates. If we saw this, this would be a case that, hey, it seems like we're, like the schools are being a little too loose, but understand that like even the idea that like, hey, you're letting in too many like low income, probably black people, like what are those people supposed to do? Like, where are they supposed to get their education? Like what we're like the problem here is that like, this is all about access to education. And while we don't have a system that is universal, which is what I want, while we don't have a system that is universal, we do have to work in the private and public, admission process. And the way that you're going to get into that, and like, at the end of the day, the way that college admissions are decided are really, really vague. Like, if you've ever, I don't know if you've like been to college, if you applied to college, how old you are, but like, I'm sure you've heard the stories of people who write, like the kid who wrote "This is bold" or whatever the fuck for his college paper. Like he did something outlandish, right? That should never get him into college, but it got him in because it was unique, right? And it's why like college admissions is really intangible, but there is an element to that. There is an element to that like looseness that can lead to, because we don't have some standards in some places, you get something like where UNC doesn't accept black people until 1955. They haven't been accepting black people into a state college for even 100 years. One of the oldest colleges we have for less than 100 years. So like, that kind of tells you that like, okay, clearly these institutions kind of have a preference for the students they want in, which is going to be the top echelon of any school they're taking admissions from. So like, what do you do with the rest of those students? the B plus students, the B students, the C plus students, where do they go? Do they get to go to any of these colleges? Will they just always get kind of like pushed out by somebody with a slightly higher GPA? Colleges need to be, in my opinion, less of spaces for people who already excel in school and more places where people just simply seek further education. I'm all for, like, I'm fine if colleges want to I guess control for really, like, I guess high value students, or better put, high level performing students. But like, we can't just have the people who go to college be the top 5 to 10% of every single school. Like, everybody else needs to be able to get an education. So like, in my world, like, we wouldn't even be bothering with a lot of this stuff. You would probably go to your state school. There would obviously be some like testing and certain things, but like, at the end of the day, like, we need people to get an education, and affirmative action was a tool that we were using to kind of increase the amount of people from these neighborhoods to get to go to college, which now might not, that number's probably going to reduce. And that overall, I don't think is going to be a good thing. Whether like we think that it's like nice and gives you a warm and fuzzy feeling because like affirmative action is rather race conscious, but like, our laws have never not been race conscious. Like, the history of this country is subjugated black people a lot of the way. Again, I emphasize that black people have only become like, and I say this like, not even like really 100%, but like, we only think of black people as having all of the rights that everybody has in 100% of this country since the 1960s. We are 60 years into the full enfranchisement of all African Americans in this country. That's not a long time. That's a really, really short amount of time. And because of that, they've been held back from generational wealth, educational attainment, educational opportunity. There's just, and like, if we just sat there and said, all right, black people, now you're equal, history be damned. Now you have full enfranchisement. Now, you're into the world. You're as equal as everybody else. It's just a lie, because those communities are, there's no, like, for hundreds of years and decades afterwards, there were laws written to keep them out of spaces. And later on, when we decided to pass laws that says, now you're going to include them, now we have the argument of like, oh, is that racist? Like, wait, it's racist to demand that you include black people in this? Like, it's silly. And regardless, this is just going to reduce, I stand by this, regardless of everything. What I think is going to happen is it's just going to reduce the admission rate of blacks into colleges. That's all that's really going to happen. And that's an overall net negative. Nobody benefits from that. It's just, now it's colorblind, but under a colorblind lens, now black people just don't go to college as much. Like, isn't that great? There are grades, and that's fine. The focus should be on increasing young minorities as grades, not reduced to colleges. Well, I don't really care about colleges standards in terms of like what I care about. Like, I don't care about colleges acceptance standards. I care about like the standards that they're getting out. What students colleges take in, I want to be pretty diverse and in a pretty big range, but I want their output to be rather consistent. Their output is much more of what I care about than what they're fed. And right now, colleges have the ability to choose their students. So like, every college wants to be, and the only reason colleges want to have all of the highest performing students is so that they can point to standards, and they can point to these things so that then they can turn around and charge more for admission. I don't even I don't like the system we have, but it is the system that we have right now. And we either take one where more black people are going to be attending, or we pick one that isn't. And this is the Supreme Court mandating that we choose the one that isn't. But all that aside, you know the thing that they tell, like at the end of all YouTube videos where they tell you to like click on one of these like things to watch more videos. Yeah, I've been meaning to film one of those. So that's what I was doing. I was just setting it up to